What do the Trump tariffs, the media, and the hands-off protests all across the country have in common? If you've been watching the news, you probably believe that these things are connected. And in fact, they are, because the news said so. But is the news being genuine about that? In this video, I'm going to share with you a story that I actually lived on how the media and the protesters from the left use this particular tactic on a very regular basis. And if you're not careful, it can manipulate you into believing something that's really none of your concern. Welcome to the Mr. Wilson's Got a Headache podcast. I'm your host, Dennis the Menace. Make sure you watch this video to the end. Check this out.
These aren't the crowd sizes the president likes to boast about. In Boston, they gathered in their thousands. In Washington, D.C., they started arriving from early morning. Their message? No matter the policy, Trump, they say, is wrong. And last night, on his most recent economic announcement, international markets seem to agree.
All right, we are getting the closing bells here in New York.
The markets have lost trillions of dollars.
We're looking at the worst week for stocks since March of 2020.
Yesterday, as markets tumbled, there was no presidential press conference or address. Instead, Donald Trump was snapped arriving at the Trump International Golf Course in Florida. This morning, he took to his social media platform, declaring, "This is an economic revolution, and we will win. Hang tough. It won't be easy, but the end result will be historic."
There's something very interesting and something very familiar about how that news anchor in that clip tried his best to tie the protest with the tariffs that just went into effect. But if you look at what the protesters want, which I'll show you in just a minute, they're actually looking for President Trump to stop cutting wasteful spending in the federal government. What does that have to do with tariffs? Nothing at all. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, and I promise you, if you sit here and you listen to the story, at the end of the story, all of this will start making sense. Let's jump back to 2013, 14, 15. Let's talk about the murder of Trayvon Martin, and then Michael Brown, and then later Freddie Gray. During that time, I was about 10, 12 years younger. So I was more active in protest and more active in community organizing. I had worked for political campaigns, helping candidates get elected. I had been doing that for years and traveled all around the country doing that. So immediately when Trayvon Martin was killed by someone with the Community Watch, I went down there and joined the protest. And while I was down there, I met some of the people who would go on to be some of the biggest names in the movement that would follow after Trayvon Martin. We were all sitting around, we were sleeping in people's houses, we were getting hotel rooms together. We were barely eating, but we protested for weeks. And then we all went back home eventually. Some of the organizations that I met were organizations like the New Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple of America, the Huey P. Newton Gun Club, Guerrilla Mainframe, the RBG movement. We pretty much met everybody that was out there at some point. But there was no Black Lives Matter movement during Trayvon Martin. There was a chant that started saying Black Lives Matter, but there was no movement. So let's fast forward to Michael Brown.
Louis police say more than a dozen people were arrested this weekend in protest over the police shooting death of an unarmed 18-year-old in Ferguson this past August. And the protests aren't over yet. More are planned for tonight and tomorrow. NBC's Ron Allen now with our report.
It was the most serious confrontation in what demonstrators from across the country call a weekend of resistance. St. Louis Metropolitan Police respond in riot gear. They say dozens of protesters were attempting to storm a gas station convenience store, some throwing rocks. The protesters insist it was a peaceful sit-in, and police had no reason to use batons and pepper spray. Here, a protester uses milk to eliminate the sting.
I was on the sidewalk. They pushed us back, and I went back. I was on the sidewalk. I didn't even see who sprayed me. I wasn't doing nothing.
At least 17 arrests, what police called illegal behavior. It's been a tense weekend, marking 2 months since teenager Michael Brown was shot and killed by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson.
We got to fight back!
Peaceful marches. Brown's mother, Leslie McSpadden, out front, demanding a grand jury charge the officer with her son's murder.
These killer cops, they got to
Angry
go.
standoffs, crowds face-to-face with officers at Ferguson Police Headquarters. Several thousand people from New York to California organized for weeks. Activists, unions, ordinary citizens, and leaders from Ferguson.
When Mike Brown was killed, of course, we all stayed in contact and we all met in Ferguson. The same organizations. The only new organizations were community activists from that area that had already been working in the community, on the ground, from the community, went to high school out there, their family lived out there, they had children out there. And so we immediately asked them how we could help them because this was their city. Now, during this time, we didn't know that the media was portraying all of us as Black Lives Matter protesters. We only knew later when we went back home and we finally started watching the news and clips and things. But the truth is, the organizations that were organizing this event for real were much smaller community organizations from around the country. And let's go back a little bit farther in history. Let's go back to the Big Five during the Civil Rights Movement. Have you ever heard of the March on Washington? If you haven't, take some time, put it in Google, read up a little bit about it. The March on Washington was advertised to the nation as something that was done by the Big Five. The biggest of those five was Martin Luther King. But the truth is, there were small community organizations that communicated with each other and organized that march. And when the larger Democratic Party heard about it, they decided that they would figure out what route they were going to take in Washington. And they would put a stage up with these big names on it. And it would lure the people to stand in front of that stage so they could get their photo op. And then they could hijack the entire movement. You don't believe me?
But the tension between police and protesters continued here last night. And around the country, similar protests turned violent.
No justice! No peace!
Last night, protesters here in Baton Rouge were defiant, but they weren't violent. They blocked the street in front of Baton Rouge Police Headquarters, and that's when police in riot gear moved in to clear the roadway. Activist DeRay McKesson with the Black Lives Matter movement was arrested for standing in the road after protesters were repeatedly ordered to get out and stay on the grass.
You still got some doubts? Well, let's take a look at this video. If you look closely at this video of the hands-off movement that supposedly has organized protests all across this country, simultaneously, you'll see the Mexican flag and other Latin country flags in the crowd. What you won't see is a lot of people running around with hands-off shirts. Most of the people in these protests have come for their own reasons. But if you pay attention to the issues that were put in the forefront when it was election time, it had nothing to do with the original energy that came from the people. And I know some of you not gonna like this, but that's why I call myself Dennis the Menace. It shifted from that to feminism, black girl magic, and the LGBTQ plus community. And I believe, because I've seen it in history, I've seen it from a first person perspective, that many of these people came for varying reasons. But ultimately, this hands-off protest, which supposedly the media says has something to do with tariffs, this hands-off protest is going to do the same thing to young people all across this country. Right now, they are just channeling your energy to get you involved so they can get eyes on the camera and get people focused on anything. But when you sit down with these people and you want to have discussions about the issues that matter to you, you might hear things like, hey, that's a long-term goal. We want to do some direct action and talk about some short-term goals, some things that we can do right now. I've been in those meetings. Now, if you really want to know who the players are in the hands-off movement, all you got to do is take a look at their website. As I'm scrolling on this website, if you do research on these individual organizations, you will find that these organizations are directly connected to the fraud, waste, and abuse that the Doge team has found in the government. And you'll see some familiar faces. Women's rights organizations, LGBTQ organizations, the normal suspects. Years ago, the same time when I was involved in all this local organizing and I used to receive phone calls from blocked numbers, but these people would give me information about what people were saying about me in closed doors. Some of the numbers did. I eventually began to recognize the voices, so I knew I was getting calls from different people. But at one point, I was offered some money because I'm the type of person who likes to read and research things before I get involved, because I'm not too trusting of what people say. I had already read that when you receive public funds, those public funds have a specific intent. For instance, if you have a grant writer and you say you want to save the planet by planting trees, and then you get a grant for $500,000, and that money is specified to be used for the transportation and all of the things that you need to do to plant trees in areas that have been deforested, but then you go and you buy a car with it, well, that's considered fraud. And when I heard about what the money was supposed to be used for, it didn't make sense for anything that I was supporting or believed in. So I turned down the money. Now, there were several other organizations in my local area that didn't turn down that money, and they didn't even have a legitimate organization. You also need to have a paper trail to prove where these funds have gone to. Most of these people during the time of Doge are having trouble sleeping at night because they know they didn't do it right. Now listen, if you're still here, I appreciate you being here. Do me a favor. I want this video to reach people who may have just wanted to be a part of something and now they're out in a protest and they don't really understand that there are organizations spread out throughout that whole crowd doing the bidding of larger organizations, and they're manipulating these people when ultimately this is going to be shifted into whatever the Democratic Party really wants over time. I need them to see this video, so do me a favor, hit the like button, leave me a quick comment, share the video on your social media, and if you want to, subscribe to the channel because there's much more content coming out. If you've seen this before, let me know. Let me know. If I'm wrong about it, let me know. Let me know in the comment section. Guys, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe I am. I've seen this time after time after time. And for you who remember why the protest started for Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and what we ended up talking to, that's all the evidence you need. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you on the next videos.